with my family, they had to leave the Philippines to pursue a quote-unquote better life because the resources of the Philippines isn't being shared to the majority of the people. A lot of it is going towards the top percent of folks, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that today through video. But most of the country is made up of peasants, 75% of the country. And so I often think about like, what would it be like if my family was able to stay in the Philippines? Like, what would have, like, if I was able to stay in the Philippines and be able to enjoy the resources that this beautiful country has. So that's kind of why I've chosen to be in this movement. It's really tied to who I am and my family's story.
Start with some poems we've prepared. Okay, so on that theme of 5,000 Filipinos leaving the Philippines every day, this is a poem by one of the peace consultants with the National Democratic Front, who we met. And so this is him writing about living in exile in the Netherlands because of displacement in the Philippines and being a political refugee.
And this is the book we got, his poems, and we also got it signed. So if you want to check it out later, just don't take it. Yeah, so this is a favorite one of mine. It's called Sometimes the Heart Yearns for Mangoes. We have a funny picture later, you'll see it. But since we're dealing with that, then we'll see it later. Okay, so it goes. Sometimes the heart yearns for mangoes, where there are apples, for orchids where there are tulips, for warmth, where it is cold, for mountainous islands, where there is flat land, far less than the home and the flow of the kith and the kin, unfamiliar now familiar, things and places trigger, the pain of sundered relations, of losses by delays and default. Direct dialing, fax machines, computer disks, and video cassettes, and visitors on jumbo jets failed to close the gap between the rehearsed appearances and the unrehearsed life at home. They are colleagues and friends that make a strange land lovable, but they have their routines, their own lives to live beyond the comprehension and pertinence of the stranger. Those who seek to rob the exile of home, kith and kin, of life, limb, and liberty are the loudest to mock at him, who is helplessly at sea, uprooted from his soil. The well-purposed exile continues to fight for his motherland, against those who banished him, the unwelcomed exploiters of his people, and is certain that he is at home, in his own country and the world. Written March 1994. So again, this was written by Jose Maria Sison, the founder of the liberation movement in the Philippines. And he is now exiled in the Netherlands. And unfortunately, just due to the US's reaction on liberation movements all over the world, he is still on the terrorist list. So he can't come home and enjoy what the country has to offer. His mangoes, right, they're better when you have them there in the country, right, not exported. So yeah, that's one poem. Thank you.
Why is there an armed revolution going on in the Philippines? After Filipinos overthrew over 300 years of Spanish rule, Spain sold the Philippines to the U.S. for $20 million. Filipino revolutionaries continued to fight for their freedom against the U.S. for the next 16 years. Over 120,000 U.S. troops were sent to the Philippines, and up to 1.5 million Filipinos were killed. The U.S. has had an extensive presence on the islands ever since. With abundant natural resources, a cheap labor force, and a large market for American products, the Philippines is a strategic location for U.S. economic and military interests in the Asia-Pacific. After World War II, the U.S. granted independence to the Philippines but maintained control over the country through military and economic agreements. The country's economy has been prevented from developing ever since. In the countryside, most of the land peasants work on is owned by landlord dynasties and U.S. corporations. In the cities, jobs are scarce and unstable. In the 1960s, students began organizing with workers and peasants to revive the unfinished revolution for genuine independence. By the end of the decade, the Communist Party of the Philippines was re-established and an armed struggle was launched, beginning a civil war that has carried on for more than 45 years. In response to massive protests and civil unrest, the dictator Ferdinand Marcos declared a state of martial law that lasted 14 years. In defiance to heavy repression from the government, the New People's Army quickly spread throughout the countryside. Even after the dictatorship was overthrown, wealthy landlords and business partners of foreign monopolies remained in power and continued to abuse government positions to enrich their personal wealth. Continued U.S. militarization led to increased violence against women and children. An overwhelming majority of Filipinos forced the U.S. military bases to close in 1992. But in recent years, the Philippine government agreed to allow the U.S. military to conduct annual combat exercises and use its military bases to protect foreign business interests. The U.S. aims to pressure China into opening up its markets. To this day, U.S. troops are continuously deployed for operations in the Philippines. Environmental destruction brought by foreign mining and logging operations displaced thousands of indigenous people and peasants. In recent years, unprecedented super typhoons exposed the Philippine government's ineffectiveness and neglect of its people. People continue to organize nationwide to replace the current system with a new people-led government that would redistribute land ownership to the poor and build national industries to develop jobs in the local economy. The New People's Army is currently laying the foundation for a new democratic government in over 110 guerrilla fronts present in 71 out of 81 provinces in the Philippines. Peace talks between the revolutionary government and the Philippine government have resumed under President Duterte after 15 years of being stalled. These peace negotiations seek to resolve the socio-economic roots of the armed conflict. In August 2016, each side declared a separate indefinite ceasefire as an act of goodwill. However, the talks are in danger of failing. Duterte has yet to fulfill his promise of releasing over 400 political prisoners, and the Philippine military continues to harass civilian communities in violation of its ceasefire. Meanwhile, crushing poverty and inequality continues to push more people to join the National Democratic Revolution in the Philippines.
Cool. Okay, so thanks for watching that and bearing with us. Really quickly, one update. The peace talks actually were canceled on November 23rd by Duterte, so formally canceled the peace talks. And what could have happened if they continued was kind of agreements on economic and social reform, right, looking like national industrialization of the country and distribution of land to the peasants. And so we, through our poetry, want to talk through the perspective of the National Democratic Front peace consultants that we got to visit this past summer. Because we know that just in watching that movie, and maybe in the news that you all have seen with Duterte's regime right now, it's turning very much into a scary, violent situation where it's pretty much like a fascist dictatorship, almost, or a repeat of history with martial law happening in the country. So yeah, that's just a quick update.
Yeah, and I think what we found in visiting, because again, we met with the peace consultants of the National Democratic Front, and what we really found with them was like, wow, the National Democratic Front is bringing forth these social and economic reforms that's going to bring, again, health to the Filipino people, and yet it's being totally rejected by the Duterte regime, which doesn't even want to talk about it anymore. So with that, we kind of want to share with you a trailer of the movie this event is a fundraiser for, which is about the peace consultants who are also the founders of this revolution. And so we want to help spread their story because, again, it's a story that's being crushed or tried to be crushed by the Duterte regime, except we see it's really spreading all over the world. And so let's watch this trailer.
When I entered college, I was already dissatisfied with the Catholic explanation of why there are so many poor and a few rich people in the Philippines. I couldn't accept the explanation that, the poor, they are poor because they are lazy.
And yet, you know that they work so hard. At the end of the day, the father could only bring so much money to feed 1 meal a day. But then of course I didn't think na, oh, they're workers are exploited and oppressed.
May mga lugar na gumagamit pa ng latigo ang mga Panginoong may lupa para pasunurin ang mga magsasaka.
We only started to become Marxists when we tried to practice revolution.
I had quite a time reconciling armed struggle because that meant violence, that meant necessary use of force.
I do not live in fear, no? When you're always worried about threats, when the real threat comes, you'll be already down.
I am encouraging people in government, the military and the police to be friendly with the revolutionary government of the Communist Party of the Philippines.
The NPA is expected to stop collecting revolutionary taxes.
Well, that is a function of the revolutionary movement and government in providing services to the people under their influence.
The Communist Party of the Philippines, or CPP, denounces President Rodrigo Duterte's declaration of martial law and orders its armed wing, the New People's Army, to intensify its offensive in Mindanao.
Then peace is not possible during our generation, and so
Magtatanim ka ng puno, hindi para ikaw mismo lang ang makinabang doon sa lilim o bunga niya, kundi pakinabangan siya ng susunod pang mga henerasyon.
All right, that's very exciting. So again, we are organizers with the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, and so that's the organization that helped facilitate our visit with the peace consultants. Is the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, and we really felt like it was important for us to go to study the facts about the situation, and just that we really believe if you want to know the human rights situation in the Philippines, we have to investigate the civil war that's going on. It's been going on 40 years and continues, and so we have to look at why is there a civil war going on, and what is the perspective in the social and economic reforms that the National Democratic Front is trying to bring forth that the government of the Philippines isn't wanting. So I just want to share that through some more poetry that I've written to kind of characterize our visit with them. The first poem is about Connie Ledesma, who's pictured there in the struggle for just and lasting peace shirt, the same one Alaris is wearing. Way to go, Alaris. So we didn't get to spend lots of time with her, just because she was on a trip and really busy. Which is one thing which is important to highlight about the National Democratic Front is that it's really world-renowned. Because there's times we were in the office and they said like, we're only here for a day. We just got invited to Venezuela to go observe the referendum on the Constitution. Or the other thing was like, oh yeah, we were in Colombia because we were visiting with their peace consultants in the peace talks that were going on there. So again, it's a movement that's reaching around the world and is really significant. No matter how much it's shut out in media. So anyway, and Connie is actually the founder of a organization called the Christians for National Liberation. And that's another thing I want to reflect about this movement is that I was first organized into it as a pastor. That was my economic work at the time. And the understanding is that the primary problem of the Philippines and also around the world is this the domination of the 1% ruling and dictating Philippine society, and that really in order to combat that we need the 99% to challenge it. So that includes a lot of Christian people who have lots of different perspectives. And so anyway, she really began that work. So this is the the poem I wrote about her. The first time I see this former nun is in a picture visiting gorillas. And the first time I meet her, she tells me of a death of the gorilla. His Christian origins like hers, and her memory of him rolls away myth like a stone from a tomb. I've decided she's the only person whose cliches I could ever believe. For when I ask her if she has time for a photograph, and she says, "There's always enough time," she speaks as one who has seen the tortured destroy their enemy without any weapons but a whisper, who has seen Christians take nails from Jesus' hands for a weapon against the rich, who has seen women take up their crosses and throw them off of mountains. There's always enough time when your life is the yeast that makes bread for a nation. So, in other words, she's done a lot for the people. So, the next poem's actually called Eat, Pray, Love. And this is, I learned from talking with Julie De Lima, who's the partner of Jose Maria Sison, who's kind of known as like the really, I don't know, like the spokesperson, or is like really out there as like founder of the Philippine Revolution and big theorist in the world. But actually, I've heard it said, you know, like Julie is actually the real Joe Ma, because she's his editor. And even when my partner asked, like, "Oh, do you like his books?" she was like, "Of course, I'm his editor." But I also found she kind of had like spunky responses sometimes, which actually took me about like 3 months to understand. Like sometimes I get kind of disappointed. I was like, what does that mean? But this poem is actually what helped me understand it a little bit better. When I ask Lola, being Julie, it's grandma, when I ask Lola, what were your revolutionary tasks? She says, "I made food." "And why did you get married in the church, Lola?" She says, "My parents wanted religion." "And why have you stayed with Joma all these years?" She says, "Because we disagree." So Lola, you make food, you get married for your parents, and you disagree. You eat, you pray, you love, and then you launch revolution. You see, the only difference between what happens in the book and in the revolution is one you pay for with your money, and the other you pay for with your life. The reason I wanted to connect that to Eat, Pray, Love was really, you know, that's kind of like this story where it's like, I'm going to go buy my happiness. And really that's actually, it's commodifying these things which are actually really good things, like food and community and yoga and meditation. But what Julie's perspective on it is like, it wasn't just to help herself, it was for the people. It was like, I make food because that's what the masses need. Like, I'm going to get married because that's what's going to help get my parents to support me more, because that's how they understand things. I disagree because we continue to struggle, and that's how we unite ultimately, is through struggling and working hard together on understanding ideas. And so I think I just wanted to really reflect that simplicity of organizing. That's what organizing is. It's you give people food, you understand their needs, you talk with them, and you struggle with them. And so I was really amazed by how they showed that just in their everyday life. Because, you know, they want to be back in the Philippines, but they can't because they're exiles. And so despite that, they're still organizing everything they can. Julie's actually the chair of the Committee for Social and Economic Reforms in the peace talks. And so she's been working hard on that this year. So kind of going along those lines, in terms of the work in the kitchen, I think one thing the National Democratic Movement does address very strongly is patriarchy, and I could just see that in a certain person I met there who really inspired me. This is partially a true story. I did burn some eggplant. I didn't burn it. I actually didn't cook it well enough. And I was trying to make a Filipino dish called tortong tolong. So I felt pretty bad about this. But this is a reflection on this other man I interacted with while cooking.
And he's the one that's hopefully live streaming right now.
Hi, Aldo. Okay. Have you met the white man who undercooks the eggplant in a kitchen full of migrant Filipinos? A kitchen full of fish oil, piles of rice, and piles of languages, piles of laughter, covered windows that block the sun, but never the beat of the rain. The only remedy to tie the white man in a Filipino kitchen is to watch how the old guerrilla fighter, exiled in drizzly Europe, grabs a spatula like his old gun in front of enemies, how he cooks the eggplant slowly, how he lets the oil crackle slowly, and then lets it pop. The reason I really wanted to connect, being like a guerrilla fighter to cooking in the kitchen, is it's really rooted in this understanding that, it's really rooted in revolutionary discipline. To like change patriarchy, we also have to change the whole society, and the issues that are at the root of patriarchy, which is landlessness in the Philippines, from the perspective of the National Democratic Movement. And so I think seeing his discipline of, again, he wanted to be back home. When I asked him, what do you want to do? He said, it's really hard because we have to struggle for 50 more years, even though we've been struggling for so long. And so, anyway, I think seeing his discipline every day meant a lot to me.
So this song is called Anak ng Bayan. Anak means child, and bayan means the people, or it means the nation. Right? So this song is basically a love letter of a child to their parents. It's basically a letter sort of asking permission, but really more so telling or trying to explain to their parents the really hard decision that they have taken to join the ranks of all of the the heroes in the Philippine liberation movements, all of the people who have really committed themselves to the highest form of sacrifice in the Philippines, and that is, in a place where a lot of people really don't have a choice but to fight and take up arms. This has been the course that a lot of youth and students and members of the different sectors of society in the Philippines have taken. You'll see, as we study more the root causes of struggle, the root problems in the Philippines, the side of the Filipino people that the NDFP has been really trying to shed light on. Slowly, I think, we'll come to understand the reason for why a lot of people really, have chosen the armed struggle, have chosen to join the struggle in the mountains, the struggle in the countryside, the struggle from the peasantry and workers, which make up 90% of the Philippine society. And it's really for, peace, just and lasting peace in the Philippines. So this song is actually, a song that a lot of people who join the New People's Army sing to their parents. I think it comes really, special and really meaningful, especially during this time in the Philippines, where you have a really fascist dictator of a president who has been really promising lately that he will crack down on a lot of progressives, on a lot of people who speak up against like his own killings against the Filipino people. Like you'll hear a lot about how Philippine President Duterte has killed so far 14,000 people in his war against drugs, which really we see as his war against the people. And this is the response of the people, the youth and students who are against that, who really want to change that. Sing on the mic.
Thank you, Kasama Band. Just I think like another picture of that song which really hit me was I was watching just a live stream recently of there's an artist singing in front of a big crowd and they're just on the artist and they zoomed out to the rest of the audience and it showed like this group of like 20 or 30 like children like probably ages I don't know like 6th grade up through high school and they're just singing along with this song like so much in tune. So I just have a couple poems to wrap up with before we move on to the yoga session. All right, so this one's called Flowers of Exile. And we are actually there for, oh, you can skip that slide. we were actually there for Julie DeLima's birthday, and Trisha had the idea to bring her orchids because, again, that's what's in the poem. It's like one longs for orchids when there are only tulips. And so we brought those to her. I think just to show how these two are really committed revolutionaries and lovers of justice until the end. They're living in exile, like continuing, like they're getting older. Joma Sison's hearings like getting a lot harder, but they're still continuing to organize. And like the whole time we were there, Joma and President Duterte were like going back and forth because Duterte kept, saying insults to Joma. And even at the same time, there's a plot that came out, like a CIA plot against Joma to kill him. And he's been arrested by the police and just been really harassed multiple times. And it's like, sometimes he can hardly hear me. So like, are you kidding? Like, are you really going to do that to this old exile? And then of course, like when we went to their house, this little apartment, they live on Magellan Street. And if you don't know, Magellan is like one of the Spanish colonizers of the Philippines. And so it's like, that strong colonialism is always there. So this is a poem about visiting them at their apartment. Flowers of Exile. Where once they looked down roads, wandering mango and banana fields, out the window of these old Filipino lovers and exiles is now a long Dutch canal lined with elm and lavender. They tell me they used to stop along the path, and like the lavender with purple crowns, more common than royal, rooted but supple to the wind, they wave to imaginary versions of themselves back in their apartment. Their shelves spill books, and the walls spill books, and the couple themselves are books. They are the 9 hanging plants that explode from above. Exiled to a foreign apartment, they flood their room with unabated life. Uprooted from their homeland, they set their roots in the sky. Amongst all plants, it is the flower of their homeland, now the flower of their exile, the orchid that they cannot sustain. But to death, the orchid waves, fading playfully, gently, like old revolutionaries going home, waving to a vacant apartment. So this last poem is really, I want to end with this one because it's really about what's up to us now that we know these things. What are we going to do in Portland, Oregon? It feels like we live really far away from the struggle in the Philippines, but at the same time, there's over 20,000 Filipinos in this area, and the struggle is very real here and very connected to the Philippines. I mean, even as non-Filipinos, the struggle is very connected to us again, as it seems like tyranny continues to grow and worsen in the crisis here. So, this poem is called Two Line Struggle, and it's really about, living in a world where a lot of times we have a choice of like, am I going to choose to struggle and choose the hard path, or am I going to take the easy road? In the final analysis, you decide. What happens to the old revolutionary who puts on red and black flannel, blue jeans, and old school blue suede Nikes? And the reason I wanted to end with that, again, was like, I just encountered one day, I was like, I'm not expecting a peace consultant with the National Democratic Front to be wearing like these cool blue suede Nikes around. But again, the kasama who did that was also one who was the one who worked in the kitchen a lot that I was talking about earlier. And the one who said, like, when I asked him, what do you want with your life? He says, it's the freedom, because it's hard. We don't want to struggle another 50 years and see our grandkids struggle another 50 years. And so he's living in the Netherlands, in that area, like it's a colonial historical powerhouse, like where, they have money, and it's there if you want to take it. I mean, that's not completely true, actually. But in terms of like the choice to continue to struggle or to choose a comfortable life, they continue to struggle, and so it's kind of our choice today to do that. So with that, I just want to pass it off to the Kasama Band one more time, who are going to bless us with one more song.
For our final song here with Kasama Band, we're going to do Muog na Puwo, which means in Tagalog, solid fortress. And the symbolism behind like solid fortress is talking about how we all basically need to come together to fight things like U.S. imperialism and spreading fascism throughout the world. And it's especially relevant, in the Philippines when we're talking about three root problems: bureaucrat capitalism, feudalism, and U.S. imperialism. How important, staying together in solidarity with folks and moving together as one and consolidating, is so important, because that's the only way we're going to be able to, defeat the enemy at the end of the day. So, muwag na buo.
Para sa pagkakaisa, pagsulong